Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has told the BBC he wants to make the case to reverse party policy on nuclear arms. He said there were many people who had a moral objection to the weapons. He also suggested the UK bombing of so-called IS targets in Iraq and Syria isn't working. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
It's hard.
Whether it's kissing babies or playing the bongos, if you want to be Prime Minister, photo opportunities, well, they come with the job.
In harmony!
But it can take a bit of getting used to. So is Jeremy Corbyn really ready?
Give me a line for tomorrow.
Is Jeremy Corbyn our next Prime Minister?
Well, I think we all hope so.
It's up to him to show that he's of the calibre to win people's support.
Well, that's what we've got to be campaigning for, but that is also what he has got to show.
But he wants to show he'd like to change the party's plan. Labour backs nuclear weapons. He does not.
Well, anyone's entitled to raise an opinion on it, and they will. In the future, I'm sure there are many people that are going to become increasingly concerned.
The party's made its democratic decision. Do you accept that that is the party policy? Because it sounds like you don't.
Of course I know what the party policy is, and of course I understand the decision that was taken. Does it mean there are people in the party who have a moral objection to nuclear weapons? Yes, there are.
You sound very determined to bring this issue back to the party.
I want to see a nuclear-free world. I want us to make up our case for that and our participation in that.
Given that it is, though, currently the party's policy, despite some attempts to overturn it, do you still stand by what you told us last year, that if you were Prime Minister, you would never use the deterrent?
I never want to use a nuclear weapon.
Let's talk about some other issues. The UK is bombing so-called IS targets in Syria and Iraq. If you were in number 10, would you continue that?
I would be demanding as quickly as possible a reconvening of the Geneva process, as quickly as possible getting Russia, America, Syria and the other parties around it.
Diplomats around the world are busting a gut to get talks to happen again. But if you were Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, would you continue UK bombing of so-called Islamic State targets in Iraq and Syria? Because that's happening right now.
And I'm not sure it's working. I'm not sure it's working. I think there has to be a political solution that brings together everybody, with the exception of IS, to isolate them, and that, I think, has to be the process.
You said this week you think there might be an early election, therefore, hypothetically, you might be Prime Minister. If you were Prime Minister soon, would you stop UK bombing of those so-called IS targets in Iraq and Syria, or not?
As a Labour Prime Minister, I would bend every muscle I've got to bring about a political settlement and peace, and that would include the non-military options that are so important, because at the end of the day, every war ends by a political settlement. Let's start from it rather than end with it.
For millions of British voters, their decision to leave the European Union was around the issue of immigration. Would you, as Prime Minister, tighten the rules so that fewer EU citizens could come to the UK?
What matters to most Labour voters is actually underfunding of schools, underfunding of hospitals, insufficiency of housing, underfunding of local government, and lack of development and jobs in their communities.
But many people are worried, actually, also about the numbers, the way they've seen their communities change.
Well, communities do change, of course, and...
So what would you actually do about immigration if you were Prime Minister?
What I would do about immigration is try and bring about a degree of coterminosity, a degree of equality on work conditions and wages across Europe.
Do you think that the wider voting public now see you as a potential Prime Minister?
I'm here to lead this party. We are setting out our economic vision and alternative, an economic alternative that does provide decent wages. We have to deal with the stresses and inequalities in Britain. That's what Labour's going to do.
Jeremy Corbyn's promises have found favour with thousands of Labour members. But after a year of discord and distress in Labour, he knows the party has to change the tune. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Liverpool.
Now, the Labour Party has not been smashed up. Jeremy Corbyn insisted today, promising he would appoint a very effective front bench team next week. This afternoon, the party's conference in Liverpool was brought to its feet by the Deputy Leader, Tom Watson. But he had a tough message for the delegates, telling them that capitalism was not the enemy and the Labour Party was not anti-business or anti-success. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is there. Gary, how did it go down in the hall?
Well, depends which wing of the Labour Party you were talking to. There are very much two parties at this gathering. One Labour MP last night said it was a bit like a divorced couple forced to live under the same roof. But there was a sense amongst the right of the party that there was a bit of a spring in their step at the end of today, because they felt that speech and the one that preceded it earlier from Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, was very much putting their side of the argument. A bit of a fight back. Sadiq Khan wasn't very heavily disguised, was making a bit of a pitch against Jeremy Corbyn's entire approach to winning elections. And when he came on, the deputy leader, Tom Watson, who of course has his own mandate, and so he's a pretty sort of tricky customer for the leader to deal with, and there's real sort of frisson there. He came in, very adrenaline-packed speech, and he attacked those people in the Labour Party who attacked Labour's past winning leaders. And this is a section of Tom Watson's speech.
I don't know why we've been focusing on what was wrong with the Blair and Brown governments for the last 6 years. But trashing our record is not the way to enhance our brand. We won't win elections like that, and we need to win elections. So now is the time to be proud of our party. We have to believe we can win, and remember how much we achieve when we do. In the past, Jeremy, I don't think she got the unity memo.
Well, a lot of people clapped that, but not, as you can see, Jeremy Corbyn, who decided to stroke his beard instead. Maybe he had more sympathy with the heckler, who I understand had shouted out, "What about Chilcot?" as in the Iraq inquiry.
So, I mean, let's be realistic. Is peace breaking out in the party?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn will hope to get that tomorrow when he talks about how there could be an early election. He's going to reshuffle the team, bring back some people who walked out when they walked out in opposition to him and took part in a no-confidence vote. But the truth is, I don't think we're going to be talking about peace. Even if he gets some names back, we're talking about, at the very best, a temporary armed truce.
Gary Gibbon in Liverpool. Well, delegates were united about one thing today. They're not in favour of Theresa May's plans to open more grammar schools. But in real life, do Labour politicians practice what they preach? Our political correspondent Michael Crick has been tracking down senior party figures who've chosen selective schools for their children.
So maths comes out of music.
Didn't know Jeremy Corbyn could play the violin? Oh dear, he can't. Still, the Labour leader does have his party in harmony in opposing grammar schools. Yet Corbyn's right-hand man, Seamus Milne, sent his children to grammar schools in Kingston. And Foreign Affairs spokesman Emily Thornberry sent her children to a selective school.
All parents would do the same thing, which is to maximise the chances of their kids and to use whatever opportunities there are for their children to do well. And that is what parents think, and that's what parents will do. And I am representative of parents.
You've sent your children
Wait a minute. And I'm also a politician, and what my duty as a politician is to make sure that there are good schools for all kids.
So there are two Emily Thornberrys out there?
No, there are not two Emily Thornberrys. I'm a mother, and I'm a politician, and as a mother I will do the best I can for my kids, and as a politician I will do the best I can for all kids.
Diane Abbott's son went to a private selective school.
Of course I'm backing Labour's campaign on grammar schools.
Well, I mean, you got a bit of a cheek when you sent your own son to a selective private school.
That was 14 years ago. If I had
you do the same now?
No, because under Labour Party rule, millions were spent on schools in Hackney, and I'll be proud to send him to one of our many excellent academies which now exist.
Lord Faulkner, who may rejoin Labour's front bench soon, sent his children to private schools too. Bit difficult for you, isn't it? You've sent your own children to
not to a grammar school. Not to a grammar school.
Private selective schools.
Well, I mean,
that's why you weren't ever an Labour MP.
Indeed.
A new Labour peer, Shami Chakrabarti, also tipped for a big party job, is reported to have taken her son to the entrance exam at Eton.
Is that right?
Did he get in?
You've been on the internet too much of late, I think.
Is that correct? What kind of school does your son go to? Is it a selective school? In this afternoon's education debate, Angela Rayner rallied delegates on the issue and even got applause for a man called Blair.
Tony Blair talked about education, education, education. Theresa May wants segregation, segregation, segregation. Grammar schools is not the answer for any child, even the gifted and talented. So we need to make sure we've got a policy that affects all children. We know that early years is the answer to that, and that's why our policy announcement today, it will help everybody across the country, not just a select few.
So you'll be telling Mr Milne that, will you?
I'll be telling everybody
Shami
that.
Chakrabarti and Lord
tell anybody that needs to know that.
And
Don't waste your money.
And
Don't waste
Diane
your money.
Abbott.
Don't waste your money. We need a fully comprehensive, good state system, and that will help every single child.
Education, not segregation. A slogan which unites Labour in words, if not always deeds.
Well, earlier I spoke to Jeremy Corbyn in Liverpool. I began by asking him whether the last year had been a waste thanks to the distraction of his party's internal divisions.
Oh, not wasted at all. We changed the party's economic policy and direction, defeated the Tories on working tax credits, forced academisation, prison contracts with Saudi Arabia.
And lost the support of 80% of your MPs.
The MPs are all coming back. We're all getting on fine.
How are you going to reach out to them?
Reach out by talking to them all, reach out by restructuring the shadow cabinet and the shadow positions, and ask them to remember that we now have 500,000 members who want to be heard and want to be participants in our party. They're not a threat, they're absolutely an asset with the biggest political party we've ever been.
But they too have been democratically elected.
Yes.
So there's a democratic voice to be heard.
We've all been democratically elected, and I think we should be very happy about that.
But you'll listen to their democratic base too?
I listen to the democracy of our movement and our party, and of course I want our MPs to come on board. And if you were in conference today, you'd have heard a succession of speeches saying more or less the same thing about the need for people to get together.
Do you get any sense that they're coming back?
Yes, of course I do. I understand MPs' concerns. I understand those that sadly decided to resign from the shadow cabinet. I've made no personal criticisms or attacks on anybody. It's not my style of doing things, and I reach out because I want the best team we can get to take the fight to the Tories and for the election whenever it should come.
We've seen a party that believes in Europe and enjoyed European membership do a very poor job of fighting to keep Britain in Europe.
Nonsense. 2/3 of Labour supporters supported a Remain position.
But you personally fought a far more vigorous campaign to remain leader than you ever did in trying to keep Britain in Europe.
I fought the local election campaign, and then I fought the referendum campaign, travelling all over the country and making the point that we had to remain in Europe and reform Europe, because there are and were concerns about Europe enforcing privatisation on British services. There were concerns about the effects of the free market. But there were also...
But be candid, you were a Betty both ways on Europe. You didn't really mind if we fell out, and you didn't really mind if we were in.
That is unfair. I had very legitimate criticisms of the free market agenda of Europe, which is something that...
Sure, but you changed that from inside. I mean, the problem surely is when you're saying to people, do you want to be in or do you want to be out? Saying, well, you know, I don't much like what there is there, I'd like to change it, that doesn't really send a message,
when you talk to a lot of people around this country, they said, yeah, we will stay in Europe. We will stay in Europe because we want the social protections and we want the freedom of travel and all those things. They were not without criticism of the European Union, and I think it's reasonable that one reflects that. But the reality is, sadly, there was a majority to leave. We have to acknowledge and accept the results of the referendum and therefore set out our lines on negotiation, and that is what we're doing. The access to the market, that's crucial. The protection of environmental, consumer and working rights are very important. Freedom of movement, I suspect, will be part of the negotiation about market access.
And what do you want on that front?
I want British people in Europe to feel secure. I want European people living in Britain to feel secure. And I suspect at the end of it, we're going to have a very high degree of freedom of movement.
The first motion that the party passed at this conference, or one of the key motions, was that if a settlement, the final settlement, was unacceptable, then Britain should retain the right to remain in Europe. Do you agree with that?
That is a position that's been put.
Do you agree with it?
I think we have to. I think we have to consider that in the negotiations and at the end of the negotiations. I would want the results of the negotiations to be put to a wide consultation within the Labour movement.
To the country?
Let's take it to the party first. I think the issue will probably come up in a general election if it's in 2020. Clearly, if the general election is sooner, then there's a huge big issue that will be debated in a different way. We obviously hope the election is sooner.
Now, one thing everybody knows about you is that you have never supported nuclear weapons and that you oppose the retention of Trident. And yet, the idea of turning over the party's commitment to keeping Trident has been dropped.
We have a defence review going on that Emily Thornberry begun. Clive Lewis is going to continue that defence review, and we're going to be fully supportive and involved in the UN Banned Nuclear Weapons Convention. The Ban Convention means that all countries in the world, including those that have nuclear weapons but are not members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, namely India, Pakistan, North Korea and Israel, can be involved in that. I think that is an important way forward.
But nevertheless, you, an anti-nuclear campaigner, are leading a pro-nuclear party. That is a fact.
I have no sympathy whatsoever with nuclear weapons. That is very well known. That's been my life. And I will continue that. I will continue that debate and that discussion. And I recognise that I have to lead this party in a direction that will bring about a nuclear-free world.
How did you feel when you discovered that 3/4 of your parliamentary party had deserted you? I mean, that's a pretty bad moment, isn't it? Did you feel like resigning?
No, absolutely not. Can't you recognise that 1/3 people voted for me to be the leader of the party? 200,000 or slightly less voted for Owen Smith.
But your status in the polls...
600,000 people took part in a democratic exercise.
But this party is not about to be elected to Parliament.
Biggest ever democratic exercise in a political party. And you listen to what's going on in conference, on the NHS, on the economy, on housing, on schools, taking it to the Tories. It's a party that actually is much more united than any of you or your colleagues ever give us credit for.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, the Corbyn wing has been on top here, but today it was the turn of the non-Corbynites to stand their ground. Now, this is a very strange time. No one here wants to admit publicly that there's a divide in Labour as wide as the Mersey, but any unity is on the surface only, and sometimes not even that. Two big characters are on stage today. Tom Watson, legendary party fixer, deputy leader, one-time right-hand man of Gordon Brown. He gave a barnstorming speech. And Sadiq Khan, the London mayor and the Labour man with the biggest personal mandate in the country, also up there. Both talked of needing to win elections or get into power. Now, such is the weirdness of the struggle in the party, these normally innocuous ideas were seen as designed to attack Jeremy Corbyn. Well, I am with John Ashworth, Shadow Cabinet member. He'll tell us otherwise in a few minutes, perhaps, but our political editor, Nick Watt, is an expert at deciphering these kinds of events.
It had all seemed to be a relatively smooth journey. All wings of the party appeared to come to terms with Jeremy Corbyn's victory. But today, the waters became distinctly choppy.
Tom Watson.
Labour's deputy leader, who's remained diplomatic during the party's troubled summer, finally gave vent to his frustration.
I don't know why we've been focusing on what was wrong with the Blair and Brown governments for the last 6 years. But trashing our record is not the way to enhance our brand. We won't win elections like that, and we need to win elections.
Jeremy Corbyn took some time to join in the applause. And for some in the audience, Watson's speech went too far.
Jeremy, I don't think she got the unity memo.
There's a certain poignancy that it's in Liverpool, scene of the battles with the militant tendency in the 1980s, that Tom Watson publicly confronted the central belief system of the Labour left. The scene is now set for an ongoing and historic showdown.
I'm telling you, you can't play politics with people's jobs and with people's services.
The man who was in Neil Kinnock's sights 31 years ago popped up at the conference.
I don't get Tom Watson. I mean, it was only like 12 months ago I was sitting having a drink with Tom Watson, actually saying to him that I'd support him for the deputy leader and actually paid a few quid into his campaign. And the way he's changed, unbelievable. Many people say well, he was always a Blairite and he's just come back to his roots of being a Blairite. Some people are actually saying he's cracked, and I don't know what's happened. And I view it more out of regret than anger.
But Watson's fans in the Parliamentary Labour Party drew strength from his impassioned speech.
This week we are bringing those different divisions together again. Tom laid out very clearly a route map for us to do that, how we can take the best of our traditions and apply them and make them relevant to the modern world, and in so doing once again make ourselves popular. And it was a brilliant speech. It's got me all fired up, and I know it's got lots of other colleagues fired up as well.
The leader of one of Britain's main trade unions thought the speech provided a useful reminder of the importance of aiming for government.
And it's great having 500,000 members. It's tremendous having 500,000 members. But there are 41 million voters. So, yes, we're with Jeremy, but we're not a fan club.
And here I'll stay.
Today, Jeremy Corbyn will bring the Labour conference to a close. Critics have just a few days to decide whether they are on board ahead of a reshuffle next week.
Nick, what there? Well, someone said the war in the party is a bit like herpes. Every time you think it may be settling down, it seems to erupt again. John Ashworth is with me, not generally seen as a Corbyn supporter, but is still serving Jeremy Corbyn in the shadow cabinet. Evening to you. Does Tom Watson, does he want to be leader, do you think? Was that a leadership bid?
I'm just still trying to come to terms with that metaphor.
Okay, don't worry, yeah, it was inappropriate.
No, I don't think that was a leadership bid from Tom Watson. And I think he is right to say, look, I think we made an error in the last Parliament by not defending the record of that past Labour government, particularly on things like the deficit and spending and borrowing. We were not prepared to take on the Tory argument that somehow Labour had completely wrecked the economy. We just kind of ran away from that argument. So I think he's right to say we should be defending the good things that a Labour government did.
And you, in your speech today, John, you had quite a bit of reminding the party that they need to fight elections. Every great reform on the statute books was because of this Labour Party winning elections. I mean, I could read you another 4 or 5 references to that in a speech. Well, why do you have to remind your party that they need to win elections? Is there anyone arguing against that?
No, there's not anybody arguing against the need to win elections, of course not. But we've been through a pretty, unfortunate, divisive summer, and now we've got to come together, pull together, and we've got to start taking on our Tory opponents. Next year, Theresa May go for a general election, who knows? But we've certainly got Scottish council elections, county council elections, mayoral elections, including here in Liverpool. We've got to win them, and we've got to get campaigning in them.
Are you meeting any resistance on that? Because it is very, very striking, right? How much your wing of the party, Tom Watson, you, Sadiq Khan, are emphasising power, win elections, this is what we've got to do. And it seems to contrast with the emphasis from the Corbynite factor.
I don't think it does control. I think Jeremy wants us to win elections. I mean, Jeremy's going to the Whitney, where we're going to have a by-election of David Cameron's seat on Saturday to campaign against the return to grammar school. So Whitney's a very tall order for us to win, but he's out there on the doorstep on Saturday.
Does it feel to you then that the party is united at the moment?
Well, look, I mean, we've had a really difficult summer. I mean, you're not going to come here and lie to you, am I? But, there's those of us who think we have to pull together. We've got to unify. When we go back to Parliament in 2 weeks' time, we've got to be an effective front bench taking on the Tories. Because actually, I think it's a very weak Tory government, funnily enough. I think there's a lot we can be exploiting on the lack of fiscal rules, on the fact they haven't got a plan for Brexit, that the NHS is in crisis, that this grammar school plan is clearly a disaster. There's loads that we can be going on in Parliament.
Right. But, Jeremy Corbyn himself refers, in his speech he's giving tomorrow, pre-briefed, trench warfare. We need to end the trench warfare. On the surface, everybody's saying, oh, yes, we've got it. They're just saying exactly what you've just said. That's because you don't have to probe very hard to find there's still an enormous amount of anger and still a lot of jostling. There's jostling for position in this party.
I mean, you know, people are still going to be feeling very sensitive and very raw. But that's why those of us in leadership positions feel that we need to be speaking out and saying we've got to unify. Because the people we're letting down by not unifying are the British people, working people who need a strong Labour Party.
And the many, many people who have interpreted your Tom Watson and Sadiq Khan's repetitious request for the party to think about winning elections are wrong to think that that is a coded attack on the leadership.
This is the first time that Newsnight has paid any attention to my speech, but I make the same speech every year when I'm saying let's get out there on the doorstep and campaign.
One of the interesting sort of things to reflect on is that Labour is in power in certain places. London, for example. Wales, for example. And there's a contrast between what you get of Labour in power and the Labour that is framing and discussing stuff here, the Corbyn Labour that we're seeing here, isn't there?
In what way? How do you mean?
Well, OK, for example, today, we've basically learned that in Wales, tuition fees are going to go up from about £4,000 to £9,000. The Welsh Government are going to implement a plan, had a commission, it's going to implement the plan of that commission to scrap the £5,000 tuition fee grant. So they'll be paying the same tuition fees pretty well as in England. Now that is a Welsh Labour government today. It's just not even on the. It's not being discussed here.
Well, to a certain extent, that's the logic of devolution. Devolved parties will make their own decisions, and that's just the system we are in.
But you're happy with it? You're happy to see tuition fees go up in Wales?
Well, I would much prefer they didn't pursue that policy, but I don't know enough about the balance of policies that they had at their disposal and what other decisions they've made.
Well,
presumably they've made other decisions around grants and access and so on. I don't know enough about it.
They've got the power to raise income tax. They're not using that power, but they are putting up. I mean, we'd have to say there's still time for them to change their mind. It's just the committee. But all the signs are tuition fees will go to £9,000. Jeremy Corbyn has clearly given the impression. He said things like, I want to apologise on behalf of the Labour Party to the last generation of students for fees, top-up fees and replacements.
It's clearly a different position to the UK Labour Party, but we have devolution. Devolved parties can make those decisions.
Does it tell you that when Labour gets into power, it has to be different from the Corbyn Labour Party that's here?
No.
Sadiq Khan implied that's the case, didn't he? And in Wales, you see that.
When Labour gets into power, as they have done in Wales and London, and indeed in cities like Bristol and my own Leicester, which is very strong for Labour, it's when the Labour leaders there, the Labour councillors, the mayoral candidates and so on, put together a package of policies which have broad appeal to the electorate. And that is what Jeremy and his team have to do as well. Put together a programme which has broad appeal, that appeals to mums and dads concerned about childcare, that appeals to people who are worried about the state of education, that appeals to people who are so frustrated and fed up that their wages have effectively been stagnant for the last 10 years. And actually, those policies are not crazy or sort of, socialist left-wing. They're just the common sense policies, and that's what we need to be talking about more.
John Ashworth, thank you very much indeed. Well, now, before we reflect on the conference so far, just think about how much the party has changed this last year. One of the rock stars here is Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who was really not much known until he was selected as the candidate for that role, which was a year ago. Our political editor, Nick Watt, managed to catch him today for a quick hello. And you'll see that when he did, Sadiq Khan was basically repeating the message that defines the challenge and kind of defines the divide of this conference.
And Labour is so far from power nationally. Are you a beacon of hope?
Well, it's very kind of you, Nick. I've been described as many things, and I'll take beacon of hope. The key thing is this, though. Look, we've got big elections across the country next year in Manchester, in Liverpool and Birmingham, mayoral elections. We need to win those. We need to win those. Why? Because those cities and regions need Labour representation. Look, speaking as the Mayor of London, I say, actually the greatest prize, though, is winning the general election. That's what Labour in Power is all about. And look, the short point is this. Look at the Labour Party's history, whether it's the creation of the NHS, the welfare state, legal aid, the national minimum wage, the Human Rights Act. We did those by winning elections. That's what Labour in Power is all about.
Winning elections. Well, here with me, Aisha Hazarika, former advisor to Ed Miliband, The Guardian's Owen Jones, and Matthew Parris from The Times, representing almost the whole political spectrum here. Aisha, do you think the party's united?
I think people are going to try to unite, but I think underneath it, it's going to be quite hard. Like, no one is thinking we're all going to come together and sing Kumbaya and it's all going to be like some big, happy, clappy family. But I think there is an acceptance, even by quite hardcore moderates who lost. You either have to step up and serve, but you have to do it properly, or you go to the backbenches and you kind of get on with what you're doing. But what you can't do is just carry on the constant sniping against Jeremy Corbyn. I think there is a feeling that you've got to accept the scale of the defeat and let him succeed or fail on his own terms now.
And Owen, is that your kind of summary of where we are?
You know what? I think actually Labour is far more united, would you believe, than people give it credit for, compared to, say, you know, the obvious reference point people always come up with is the 1980s. But ideologically, there were far greater divisions in the 1980s in terms of nationalisation, the top two in the monopolies, and so on and so forth. These days, actually, on all wings of the Labour Party, there's quite a lot of consensus on investment in the economy, not cuts. Whether it be supporting comprehensive education, not selection in education, tax justice, clamping down on tax avoidance, workers' rights. There's not actually, when it comes to, if you go through each individual issue, there's not a massive chasm.
I think freedom of movement is going to be quite a divisive issue in the Labour Party.
Yeah,
but that cuts ways.
Because it's not a left-right issue in the way some of those.
But it's funny because as you speak, Owen, you actually remind me that even the Tories are agreeing with quite a lot of what you're saying. Because the whole of politics. No, they have. They're saying whether they do it or not. They're saying it. Matthew, come on, just a quick one on whether they're united and how you.
Of course, they're not united. Owen speaks for the victors, and the Corbynistas have won. Yeah. And the Labour Party can find unity if the moderates in the Labour Party accept defeat. And I agree with Aisha. In a sense, they're going to have to accept defeat if the party is to be united. I don't think they should, but...
The question is, right, you can have unity, you can have slightly dead-eyed unity, though, where we all get together and we move further away from the public. That is not going to be great for the general kind of overall outcome.
That's the thing, look, I think actually Labour has to be broad church. That's how it always succeeds. And I think this idea that the left of the party have conquered all before them and want to crush all opposition is just not borne out actually by the reality. And actually, as I've said, on the issues, if people can name it, I'm fascinated by this, if people can go through issues where there's a genuine, massive ideological chasm, because I don't think it's there. I think on the main issues, there's quite a lot of
Take John McDonnell, the remark that we no longer need to whisper the name socialism. That's not broad church.
Do you know the only leadership candidate in 1994 when he stood for leader? There are three candidates. One of them was Tony Blair. Which one was the only one who used socialism?
I don't know.
Tony Blair.
We know
I just think
that Tony
socialism.
Blair was not a socialist.
I don't think a shadow chancellor exchequer talking about socialism at Labour Party conferences is a new thing. The truth is on the policies, not words like that. The policies.
All of this is about policy. There is also a big kind of cultural sort of divide in the party, and that's the thing. You have to be honest about that. Look, I think we've got to try and find some way of coming together, mainly because we're so exhausted by fighting. We've taken lumps out of each other over the summer, and everyone is spent. And I think I sort of agree with kind of Matthew. I think, and Matthew sort of agrees with me on this, I think the moderates, and I am a moderate, I voted for Owen Smith.
Yeah.
We've got to accept.
No, it doesn't matter. Just finish.
I think moderate is like a bad. We've got to accept, like, we lost, right? We challenged. We made a really stupid challenge. We lost really badly to the victor, the spoils.
Right.
And you guys won.
What happens?
And you can sort of do what you want
What
now.
happens?
We have to accept
Owen,
that.
stay out of this one. What happens to the moderates? I don't even know what we call them. Moderates,
it's
right-wing, anti-Corbyn, the non-Corbyn. What do they do now? Do they sit? Do they find another job?
They give in. They give in. They run up the white flag. Some of them decide just to toe the Corbynite line. Others, most I suspect, slink away from politics and don't stand again at the next election. And quite a few of them will be afraid of being reselected. That's Labour unity. That's the only kind of Labour unity that's now available.
But that is very sad, if you like, for the political centre, which has tended to think that the right of the Labour Party and the left of the Tory Party kind of are the
only thing I'd say against that, I think there is going
Did you agree that's what a lot will do?
No, not at all. I think all sides need to give and take. Look, I think the MPs obviously have to accept the democratic verdict of what the biggest political party in Western Europe and more members' involvement in setting policies, but equally, the leadership should oppose mandatory reselection so MPs don't feel that threat, and at the same time, why not have a portion of the shadow cabinet, not the whole thing, but a portion, elected by MPs.
That's the kind of compromise that gets you to.
This is the point. We end up with this sort of discussion. It's your interest, I know, you're a Conservative, to focus on those internal divisions, but actually there is lots of scope for common ground, and I think all sides just need to give a bit.
I have no interest as a Conservative in focusing on these internal divisions. What I'm suggesting, which is basically that the Labour moderates should not give up without a fight, should not go for Labour unity, should stand up for themselves and their beliefs, would actually, or could be, fatal to the Conservative Party in a period ahead when I think the Conservative Party is going to be in all kinds of trouble. What you're suggesting, which is that Labour should unite around a Corbynite line, actually is fine for the Conservative Party. You know, we're happy about that in electoral terms.
False, fake unity is not going to help anybody. And we have to be honest. Look, if you have spent the summer doing tearful interviews about what a beast Corbyn was and how you think he's not fit for purpose, you can't now crawl back to the shadow cabinet and so say, I've had some huge conversion, I think he's this... it's not authentic to do that.
Can the non-Corbyn wing ever get the keys back to this vehicle? Because some of them are talking about trying to find 500,000 new members, mainstream moderate members of the public to join. The people like that just don't join a party in the way Momentum members do they? Or
I think it's depressing. We've not focused on the policy issues. It's all kind of
we tried it last night, and there was very.
Well, I just think it should be about policy issues, but nonetheless, look. Actually, it's in the interest. Look, if MPs think Labour's heading for terrible defeat, then they want the leadership to own it. If they're seen to be undermining the leadership, then many members will say, well, actually, this is your fault. And actually, I think if the leadership is seen to give ground, if they're seen to give up with an inspiring alternative that resonates with the majority, middle class, working class, young, old and so on, then people who rebelled against Corbyn can go, look, I had big grievances, big problems, but they have changed. They've listened, and because of that, despite the grievances I had...
quick one to you, Owen, even though you're getting a lot of the airtime here. You wrote you would support Corbyn, but Corbyn Mark II had to be different to Corbyn Mark I. Are you seeing evidence here, in all seriousness, that he's different, or he's learned, or he's picked up the kind of things you said he needed to do, which was to build a broader coalition?
He was re-elected 3 days ago, so I'm not quite sure what basis I have to talk about that. But I think, yeah, there are promising signs. Actually,
do you see those, Matthew? Do you see any?
There's no sign at all. I mean, they're rampant. They've won, and they're talking, they're crowing as though they've won, and good luck to them. What Labour MPs don't understand is over the next 3.5 years, there's a huge opportunity for them. There's a Conservative Party which has been returned with a leader who has been given a mandate that she can't possibly fulfil. The Conservative Party are not united. They're ready to split. And if Labour MPs in the House of Commons were to unite and to oppose the government and to oppose the government in the lobbies, they have enormous potential power.
That's next week's Tory Party conference. Now, look, the three of them are going to hang around. We're going to do one of our Facebook Live things, starting in a few minutes. So you can put your questions to Matthew, Aisha and to Owen. We'll go and get a drink and go into a quiet space nearby.